Okay, so today we're going to talk about what happens if a member can't quite get crawling, especially when you're working with a new group. And crawling is one of the first movements we like to get in. We like to get all kinds of different locomotion in, but one of our bread and butter movements is going to be leopard crawls, bear crawls, or other crawling variations. So when somebody's having a trouble with crawling, the first thing you want to try to figure out is why. Why is it that they have trouble? And a lot of times the clue will be in where they fail to crawl, or also what they're saying or how they're acting. So you need to think about, is it mental? Is it physical? So quick checklist I would think about is, first off, is it a matter of complexity or coordination? Are the people getting tangled up? Are they having issues with the contralateral movements? That's going to be one of the big issues. Number two, is it strength? Is it core stability? Do they just have trouble sort of holding themselves in a plank position? Do they have trouble holding themselves in the dynamic plank position where they're moving contralaterally and they only have half the support at any one time? So that's another thing to consider. Third thing to consider is there some sort of interference from another movement? Is it another movement that they've been taught in the past or even taught recently that could be getting in the way? So a good example is when I'm warming up crawls for the first time, I'm probably not going to do any sort of Spider-Man crawls, because the Spider-Man crawl is going to interfere with the regular crawl, with the bear crawls and leopard crawls. People are going to get tangled up. They're going to bring their legs up too high, and it just ends up causing a bit of an issue. Another thing to consider is it just a matter of confidence? Do the clients or do the members feel uncomfortable? Can you tell that they're getting frustrated? Are they a little bit slower than everybody else? Are they in a situation where they feel like everybody's passing them? So that's something you want to consider as well. So those are probably the main reasons why it is that people have trouble crawling. Now what we should do is we could talk about how we can get past all those barriers to ensure that people start crawling and have a nice time. So one of the things that you can do to really ensure that you have a higher success rate with crawlers, especially when working with a new group, is to think about your warm-up sequence. So if you're getting your programming from us, oftentimes we'll have warm-up sequences that'll help, but sometimes we might have a really crawling specific warm-up sequence in some of the earlier workouts, from the earlier classes. In a later class, we might not include all that detail because it's in the assumption that most of the members who are here will already be comfortable with crawling. But a good thing to do is to look back and see how we taught the crawling sequences at the beginning, and sort of take that and put it into your coach's toolbox, so that in the future you'll remember, okay, well, when I teach the crawls in this sequence, I tend to have pretty good success. So I'm going to talk about some warm-ups that we like to do when we do the crawling. So the first thing to remember is that crawling is a contralateral movement, and one of the biggest restrictions that some people are going to have is they're going to get confused in the contralateral stuff. So remember, contralateral is opposite hand, opposite leg. So if I'm moving my right arm, I'll be moving my left leg, and vice versa. So some people find contralateral movements really challenging, which is one of the reasons why crawls are so good for people and so good for people's brains. But if people do have that limitation, you want to start warming it up right away. So before you even get them crawling, if I'm going to teach a class that has lots of crawling in it, I'm going to start warming up the contralateral movements right away. So the first thing I might do is I just might work on some marches. And there's different styles of marches, but something like this is going to be good. So opposite hand, opposite leg, just like that, back and forth. Just get the brain starting to think about the contralateral movements. Other styles of marching you can do sort of cross crawl march, where you bring your elbows along the midline. It's wet out today and I'm wearing some pretty heavy duty rain gear, so I can't quite get my elbows and knees to touch. But getting your body parts across the midline can help with those brain connections. So you've got that. Once people feel confident on that, something that's useful as a coach is to start seeing who's having trouble with the contralateral movements and start thinking about it. And a good way to test that is to start to add a little bit of speed, so we can add some skips. So have everybody starting in this contralateral position, and then you can just add some skips And the skips will be the first time where you really start to see people get a little bit confused. See if they can get it. If they get confused, reload them back up. It's a good contralateral movement. After you get the skips out of the way, it's nice to get down to the ground. So probably the first movement I'm going to do from the ground is I'm going to do a bird dog. And today you don't have to do really strict Stu McGill bird dogs, but it is nice just to get people thinking about this position and see right away, are there some people who have stability issues? And on these, just have them go back and forth. So it's not so much about holding them at the top today. It's just getting people to load that contralateral movement. So the bird dogs are going to be really useful. And now people are in this quadruped position. It's also good, you don't have to, but it is good to test the various positions. So if people are comfortable here, just see, are they comfortable in the raised knee quadruped in the beast position? Okay? Just see how they feel in that position. Make sure they understand this position for the crawling. One of the things you can do is you can go from this knees hovering position into a sort of downward dog, high hip bear crawl position. Just have them go back and forth a few times. Also, this isn't required, but it is good to warm up the wrist a little bit. A quadruped wrist warm-up is nice. So from here, there's two ways you can do it. You can do fingers away, and you can sort of rock forward like this. I'm sort of moving in semicircles as I do this, so I load up my wrists from different angles, doing a few of these. I also like to get my middle fingers, my fingers pointed back towards my knees. You can kind of rock back here, rocking back and forth, again doing semicircles, this time sort of like a bowl shape, like that, warming everything up. So that's a nice warm-up. Now from here, there's lots of things we can do to start thinking about the crawling. Probably the first thing I'll do is just what I call a leopard crawl touch or a bear crawl touch. So from here, you get back into your beast position, your raised quadruped position, and have everyone go ahead and shake the right hand and wiggle their left leg. And then what we're going to do is we're going to reach forward and come back. And do this about 4 or 5 times. Reach forward and come back. Reach forward and come back. Reach forward and then come back. And then do it the other side. Reach forward and come back. Reach forward and come back. Reach forward and come back. And once everybody's done that, this will be when I first get people to start crawling. So once I feel like people have that, I'll get them back in this position, and we'll do the reach, and we 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 reach. Come back. Okay. So hopefully people would be getting the crawling then, but some people still might. So now it's time to start thinking about what the issues are. Now, if it's a stability balance thing, then you can just have them do baby crawls at first. And a baby crawl, it just means that your knees are on the ground, you're supported. If that's what people have, that's fine. Another way that you can scale this down is actually the higher your bum is, the less stressful it's going to be on the core. In the leopard crawls, because you're pretty much at parallel, it means that all your moment arms are going to be least advantageous. Your body's going to be feeling most of the weight. But if you push your bum up, all right, like this, then you can try some bear crawls. And that's fine. That'll help people. That's a good sequence that you can do, and that'll get most people going. Now, when you're crawling, what we need to start thinking about is, are people getting frustrated? And is there a big disparity in speed and confidence? And if so, these are some things that we can address. So the first one is if you're having people crawl for distance, okay? First time people crawl, they're going to get all tangled up. And what I mean is people are going to be crawling, and then maybe they're going to end up in a position like this, and they sort of don't really know how their hand got up there, so they raise their other thing, and then they're here, and they're all bunched up on themselves. So the best thing to do is just have people go back to the starting position and spend some time talking about how this is the starting position. And if they get all weird and tangled up, just say go back to neutral, go back to start, try a reach, and then a reach, and then a reach. And that'll help. So when people get tangled, don't try to necessarily untangle them, because it's going to be like a game of twisters. Be like, okay, move your left arm forward, move your left leg back. It's going to get too confusing. Have them go back to neutral and do that. Another thing to consider is if it is a confidence issue, especially if you're in a situation where you're going for distance and people feel like it's a race, even if it's not a race, people are going to be conscious of the fact that they're behind everybody else. So one of the things you can do is you can set the norm for that day, especially if you're doing the warm-up, to say, all right, guys, the movement we're doing today is called a slow crawl. You can even call it a sloth crawl. And there are benefits to doing a slow crawl. You can say, this is going to be really good for core control. It's going to be really good for teaching stability and balance. So the rule is I don't want you to go fast. I want you to go nice and slow at each position and try to be under control the whole time. So if you have some people who have coordination issues, you can get them back here and say, all right, guys, we're just going to go slow today. And then you can add speed later. And then if that's too hard for their core, you can have them do the bear crawls, which is just going to make it a little bit easier. Just have them go for the slow reach, the slow reach. And doing that is really good. Now, one of the things I talked about is sometimes you're going to have interference from other movements. When you're introducing the leopard crawls, don't do too much other quadruped or locomotion stuff, because it's gonna mess people up. And the classic example is I really like Spider-Man's as a warm-up, but if you have people do some variation of a Spider-Man and then you have them crawl to the next one, okay, then when people start working on their crawls, you're gonna have people who are leopard crawling like this. Even if you tell them they're not related, it's still gonna be in the back of their head. So you don't want to give them too many similar movements on the day you're introducing the crawls, because there's going to be that interference. Last thing I would talk about is related to confidence as well, which is one of the things you really want to foster in your communities is you want to foster the sense of sort of being able to laugh at yourself and realizing that there are certain things that you're not going to be so good at, certain things you're going to be good at. I do it all the time as a coach. Luckily, I've got all kinds of limitations. I've got really stiff hips that make it really hard for me to get into certain positions sometimes. So I show people all the time the things that I'm not so good at, and sometimes I'll even demonstrate something and I'll just completely mess up and fall over and kind of laugh at myself. Everyone else can laugh at themselves. You want to get people comfortable with this idea that we're here to improve. Nobody's judging us. Nobody's perfect. So when you're doing the crawls as well, make sure that everyone is having a nice time. You're encouraging people. People are sort of falling and laughing and getting back up. And that's where a lot of benefits come from the classes, is giving people an opportunity to not be perfect, okay, allowing them to have fun exploring, and then giving them an opportunity to improve over time. So I think if you take these things into consideration when you're doing the crawls, you're going to have much more success. And just remember, you don't have to do this sequence every time. But keep it in your back pocket. So if you are working with people and you realize that, okay, these crawls are going to be quite advanced for this group of people, okay, think about how can you pull back, start at the beginning, slowly introduce the contralateral movements, start to check people for things like balance and coordination and stability, and then think about how can we scale that back in such a way so everybody has a good time and has an opportunity to get better.